For 40 years, a man in Louisville, Kentucky sat on the same bench outside the same Veterans of Foreign Wars post on Bardstown Road every Tuesday morning at 7 and listened to the city wake up. He could not see the city. He had been blind since 1983, when a landmine in Beirut took his sight and 3 fingers from his left hand. But he had learned Louisville the way you learn a language you love, through sound and texture and the specific weight of familiar air. He knew the Tuesday pigeons from the Wednesday ones by the pattern of their movement overhead. He knew the coffee smell from the diner 2 doors down changed at 7:15 when the lunch prep started. He knew the particular quality of silence that preceded rain in that part of the city by 40 minutes and had never once been wrong. His name was James Elmore, 71 years old, and for 40 years the bench had been his, and the city had been his, and the Tuesday mornings had been his, until his son changed the locks on the house in November, and the bench became the only thing left. 1,100 miles away, in Burbank, California, Steve Harvey arrived at Fremantle Studios on a Tuesday morning at 6:45 and found the side entrance locked. A facilities issue, a broken key card reader, something routine, and the production assistant, who was supposed to be there with a backup, had been stuck in traffic on the 101 for 35 minutes. Steve was told to wait. He walked around to the front of the building, which put him on a public sidewalk he did not normally use, facing a bus stop bench he had never in 7 seasons of taping had reason to notice. Sitting on that bench was a man in an army field jacket with a white-tipped cane across his knees and a paper coffee cup balanced on his thigh, with the careful precision of someone who has learned to trust his hands more than his eyes. Steve Harvey stood on that sidewalk for a moment, then he sat down next to him. He had 40 minutes. He had nowhere else to be. And nobody in that studio knew what was about to happen. James Elmore had served in the Marine Corps from 1979 to 1984. He was 23 years old when the bombing happened. The Beirut Barracks, October 1983, a morning that took 241 American servicemen and took James's sight and took the 3 fingers and took, in a quieter and longer way, the version of his future he had been building in his head since childhood. He came home to Louisville, unable to drive, unable to do the construction work he had trained for, unable to read the faces of the people who looked at him with an expression he could feel without seeing. He learned Braille. He learned the cane. He learned the city block by block, year by year, until Louisville was less a place he navigated and more a place he inhabited, the way a musician inhabits a song, not reading it anymore, just playing it. He married in 1986. His wife, Carolyn, had been a nurse at the VA facility where he received his early rehabilitation. She had loved him with the practical, clear-eyed love of a woman who understood exactly what she was taking on and had decided, with full information, that she wanted it. They had 1 son, Marcus, born 1989. Carolyn died of a heart attack in 2016, quickly, without warning, a Tuesday morning in April, and James had sat on the bench outside the VFW post that same afternoon because he did not know what else to do with his body, and the bench had always known what to do with it. Marcus had come home for the funeral. He had not come home much before that. He lived in Nashville, worked in finance, had a wife and 2 children. James had met 4 times. After the funeral, Marcus came to the house on Tuesday evenings for 3 weeks, and then the visits became calls, and the calls became shorter, and eventually James understood, from the specific quality of his son's voice in those calls, clipped, distracted, the voice of a man solving a problem he resents, that Marcus had categorized his father's situation as a logistics issue and had decided the logistics were not his to solve. The VA provided a home health aide 3 days a week. It was not enough. James managed the other days with a combination of neighborhood help. A woman named Dolores from the church 2 blocks over brought groceries on Thursdays, and the specific competence of a man who had been adapting to difficulty for 40 years. He did not call Marcus about the days when the aide didn't show. He did not call Marcus about the leak under the kitchen sink that he could hear but not fix. He did not call Marcus when the property management company that had bought his block sent a letter, which Dolores read to him in the kitchen, informing him that the house would not be renewed for another lease term, and he had 60 days to vacate. He called Marcus then. Marcus said he would look into some options. He looked into them for 30 days, which left 30 days. Then he called back and said that assisted living in Louisville was expensive, and that a facility near Nashville made more financial sense, and that he had found a place that had availability, and that it would be good for Dad to be closer to family. James asked if Marcus had visited the facility. Marcus said he had looked at it online. James said he would think about it. He thought about it for 2 weeks, which left 2 weeks, and he called Marcus and said he did not want to go to a facility near Nashville or anywhere else, that he wanted to stay in Louisville where he knew the city and had the bench and had Dolores and had 40 years of Tuesday mornings. Marcus said he understood, but the logistics weren't workable, and he had already put the deposit down, and he needed Dad to trust him on this. James Elmore went to Nashville for 19 days. The facility was clean, and the staff were professional, and every single thing about it was wrong. The hallways were wrong. The sounds were wrong. The air was wrong. The distance from the bench was wrong. He called Dolores from the facility phone. She drove to Nashville, which took 3 hours, and sat with him in the common room while he told her what he needed, which was to go home to Louisville, even though there was no longer a home in Louisville to go to. She drove him back on a Saturday. He stayed in her guest room for 2 weeks, and then he started spending his days at the bench and his nights at the VFW Post's emergency shelter, which was not a real shelter, but a back room with 2 cots that the post commander had quietly made available for veterans in immediate need. And that was where James Elmore had been for 6 weeks when Dolores, who had been watching Family Feud on a Thursday night and crying about James into a dish towel, found the show's online contact form and typed a message at 11 p.m. that said simply, "I have a veteran here who needs someone to see him. I don't know if this is the right place to send this. I'm sending it anyway." And that wasn't even the part that made Steve cry. The production team had received Dolores's message and had flagged it, and had been in quiet contact with her for 3 weeks before the Tuesday morning when the keycard reader broke. They had been arranging for James to attend a taping as an audience member. Not a contestant, just an audience member, because nobody had figured out yet what the right thing to do was, only that doing something was better than doing nothing. James did not know about the contact between Dolores and the show. He did not know that the man who sat down next to him on the bench that morning was Steve Harvey. He knew someone had sat down. He knew from the quality of the pause before the sitting and the deliberateness of the movement that it was someone who had chosen to sit rather than someone who had landed there by exhaustion. He said, "Morning." Steve said, "Morning, cold today." James said, 41 degrees. Wind from the northwest, about 8 miles an hour. Rain in an hour and a half. Steve looked at him. He said, "You sure about that?" James said, "I'm sure about that." Steve said, "How do you know?" James said, "The air's got a particular weight before rain. You get to know it." Steve was quiet for a moment. He said, "How long have you been learning it?" James said, "Long time." They talked for 37 minutes on that bench. James did not know who he was talking to for the first 11 of those minutes. until Steve mentioned the studio, and James tilted his head in the precise way of a man who is recalibrating and said, "Are you Steve Harvey?" Steve said yes. James was quiet for a moment. He said, "My wife loved your show." His voice did the thing voices do when the past tense of someone appears without warning. Steve heard it. He did not move past it. He sat with it the way you sit with a sound that needs to finish before the room moves on. James told him about Carolyn. He told him about the bench. He told him about Beirut, briefly, the way men who were there tell it, in the compressed, factual language of people who have learned that the full version is not something most conversations can hold. He told him about the 60 days, and the deposit Marcus had put down, and the 19 days in Nashville, and the back room at the VFW post. He did not tell it with self-pity. He told it as inventory. This happened, then this, then this. The way you recount a route you've traveled too many times to find remarkable anymore. When James finished, Steve Harvey sat on the bench in 41-degree weather and did not say anything for a long time. Then he said, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to be straight with me." James said, "Okay." Steve said, "Are you done?" James turned his head toward Steve's voice. He said, "I don't know." Steve said, "Let me tell you something. I made a promise once. I was at my lowest. I mean the floor, the actual floor, nothing below it. And I made a promise to God that if He got me through it, I would spend the rest of my life showing up for people who needed someone to show up. I have tried to keep that promise every day since." He paused. "I believe I am on this sidewalk today because of that promise. I believe this bench is why the keycard reader broke this morning. I don't know how else to explain it." He looked at James, not at his eyes, but at his whole face, the way you look at someone when you want them to feel looked at. He said, "You are not done yet." James Elmore sat on the bench in Louisville wind with his white-tipped cane across his knees and his coffee balanced on his thigh. He did not say anything. After a moment, he turned his face toward the particular quality of morning light he could feel but not see, and he nodded. Steve's phone rang. The keycard reader was fixed. He stood up from the bench and said, "I need you to come inside with me today." James said he was supposed to come to a taping already. Dolores had arranged it. Steve said he knew. He said, "But I need you to come in with me. There's a difference." James stood up from the bench and picked up his cane, and Steve Harvey offered his arm, and James took it, and they walked around the corner to the studio entrance together, and nobody on the sidewalk knew what they were watching. James Elmore sat in the front row of the studio audience for the first taping of the day. During the second taping, a family from Memphis against a family from Denver, Steve stopped the show midway through the second round. He said to the audience, "There is a man in the front row I need to introduce to you." He walked to James and crouched beside him, in the aisle, beside the front row seat, and he said, quietly enough that the main mics barely caught it, "Is this okay?" James said, "Yes." Steve brought him to the stage. James walked with his cane, straight-backed, the walk of a Marine that 40 years had not fully discharged. The studio fell completely silent. Steve stood beside James and told the audience what James had told him on the bench. Not all of it, not the private inventory, but enough. The service, Beirut, Carolyn, the 60 days, the deposit Marcus had put down without visiting, the bench, the back room at the VFW. He did not editorialize. He did not perform outrage. He said the facts in a level voice and let the facts be what they were, which was sufficient, which was more than sufficient. And then James said something no one was prepared for. He said to Steve, in front of everyone, in the same calm inventory voice, "I don't blame my son." The studio fell completely silent. He said, "Marcus doesn't know how to do this. His grandfather didn't know how to do it either. I didn't teach him because nobody taught me. We don't pass it down, how to show up for the old ones. We just hope someone figures it out." He paused. "I'm not angry at Marcus. I'm tired. There's a difference." He turned his face toward the light, the way he had on the bench. "I'd like to hear from him, though, if that's possible. I'd just like to hear his voice." Steve Harvey turned away from the audience for a moment and faced the rear of the stage. A crew member near the lighting console had both hands pressed over her mouth. A stagehand had walked backward until he was against the rear curtain and had stopped there. The Memphis family on stage had not moved. The Denver family had not moved. The grandmother from the Denver family, 78 years old, a woman named Ruth, who had driven to the airport at 4 in the morning for this taping and had been checking her phone for updates from her cat's sitter, had stopped checking her phone. She was looking at James Elmore with an expression that had no performance in it, only recognition. The recognition of someone who understands from the inside what it is to be old and unvisited, and still unwilling to be unkind about it. Steve picked up a phone. He called Marcus Elmore in Nashville. Marcus picked up. Steve told him his father was on the Family Feud stage in Burbank, California, and that his father had just said, in front of 200 people, that he did not blame him. Marcus did not speak for a long time. Steve said, "Your father wants to hear your voice. That is all he said he wanted. I need you to give him that right now, and then I need you to figure out the rest." Marcus said, "Can I talk to him?" Steve handed the phone to James. The studio stayed completely silent for 4 minutes, while a blind veteran in an Army field jacket stood on a game show stage and talked to his son in a voice too low for the microphones to capture in full. The audience did not move. Crew did not move. At the end of 4 minutes, James handed the phone back to Steve. His face had changed in the particular way of faces that have received something they had stopped expecting. He said to Steve simply, "He's coming." But Steve wasn't done. He turned to the full studio and said, "I want to talk about something we don't talk about enough. There are veterans in this country, men and women who gave their bodies and years, and in some cases, everything they had, who are sitting in back rooms and on park benches and in facilities where nobody knows their Tuesday morning bench, or their 41-degree wind, or the way rain smells 40 minutes before it arrives. They gave us everything, and we have organized a system of looking past them that we have all agreed to participate in, mostly without noticing." He held his cane. James had handed it to him briefly while he answered the phone, and Steve had not yet given it back. He looked at it. "We can do better than this. Every single person watching right now can do one thing better than they did yesterday. Call someone. Visit someone. Sit down on a bench next to someone and stay." He handed the cane back to James. "That is all it takes. I broke no rules this morning. I just sat down." Both families won. The Memphis family won fast money. Steve paid both families' winnings from his own account and designated an additional $40,000 to a veteran housing fund in James Elmore's name. The Denver family's grandmother, Ruth, walked across the stage before leaving and took James Elmore's hand in both of hers and held it without saying anything for a long time. James held on back. The competing family from Memphis, their patriarch, a 62-year-old man named Gerald, who had himself done 4 years in the Navy, told a producer afterward that he had almost canceled the trip because of a work conflict, and that he would spend the rest of his life grateful he hadn't. Marcus Elmore arrived in Louisville 9 days later. He did not book a hotel. He stayed at Dolores's house, in the guest room where his father had slept. And on the first morning, he took his father to the bench on Bardstown Road at 7 a.m. And they sat together while the city woke up, and James told him about the pigeons and the coffee smell at 7:15 and the 40-minute rain warning in the weight of the air. Marcus had brought a notebook. He wrote it all down. He did not know why exactly, only that it felt important to have a record of it, to have it in his handwriting, to be the person who made sure it wasn't lost. He found James an apartment 3 blocks from the VFW post. He arranged for daily aid coverage, not 3 days a week. He applied, with the help of a veterans legal aid organization that Steve's team had connected them to, for a full VA disability compensation review based on James's service-connected blindness, a review that had never been properly completed in 40 years of intermittent VA contact. The review took 7 months. The determination, when it came, included retroactive compensation that the family's attorney described as significant. Marcus called his father when the letter arrived and read it to him over the phone. James listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When Marcus finished reading, James said, "Your mother always said they'd figure it out eventually." Marcus laughed. It was the first time he had laughed in that particular way. The way that has grief in it, and relief in it, and love in it all at once, in a very long time. The episode aired August 3, 2021. Day 1, 178 million views. End of week 2, 441 million. The hashtag #YouAreNotDoneYet trended in 89 countries. The Veterans of Foreign Wars National Organization issued a public statement citing the episode. The Senate Veterans Affairs Committee requested Steve Harvey's testimony at a hearing on elder veteran housing. He gave it, with James Elmore seated beside him. 3 states passed legislation in the following year expanding emergency housing protections for veterans over 65. A veterans advocacy nonprofit reported that calls to their helpline from family members of veterans increased 380% in the month following the broadcast. Steve Harvey established the 40 Years Foundation in early 2022, named for the 40 years James Elmore had learned a city by sound and weight and weather. 40 years of building a life inside a limitation and refusing to call it less than a life. The foundation focused on blind and low-vision veterans, housing navigation, legal advocacy for disability compensation reviews, and what the foundation called presence services, regular scheduled human contact for veterans living alone. In its first year, the foundation served 2,100 veterans across 41 states. James Elmore was on the advisory board. He attended every quarterly meeting in person. He was always the first to arrive. In an interview the following spring, Steve was asked whether he believed the broken keycard reader was coincidence. He thought for a moment. He said, "I stopped believing in coincidence around 2003. I was in a car, nothing was working, and a stranger at a gas station said something that kept me alive. There was no reason for that man to say that to me. There was no reason for that key card reader to break on that Tuesday. There is no reason James Elmore was on that bench at that exact time." He paused. "I'm not going to argue with the math. I'm just going to keep showing up when it happens." James Elmore sits on the bench on Bardstown Road on Tuesday mornings. He always has. The city is the same city it has always been. The same pigeons, the same coffee smell shifting at 7:15, the same 40-minute wait in the air before rain. He carries the cane. He carries the knowledge of 40 years. He carries the Tuesday mornings the way you carry the things that make you yourself. Not as weight, but as definition, as the accumulated evidence of a life built deliberately inside whatever the world handed you. On some Tuesday mornings now, Marcus sits beside him. He brings 2 coffees. He doesn't always talk. He is learning to be comfortable in the silence of someone he loves, learning it later than he should have, learning it nonetheless. James turns his face toward the morning light the way he always has, not looking for it, not missing it, just receiving it. The warmth of it on a face that has learned to find orientation in things other than sight. He knows where east is. He always knows where east is. He lifts his face toward it. He says nothing. He listens to the city he has spent 40 years learning, and the city keeps teaching him, and he is not done yet. And the bench knows it, and the Tuesday morning knows it, and the particular weight of familiar air knows it, and now so does everyone else. If this found you today, share it with a veteran you know. Share it with someone whose bench you haven't visited in too long. Subscribe and ring the bell, because every week we go looking for the people the world forgot to look at, and we refuse to look away.